Here in Genesis chapter 12, God communicates to Abraham a message that I think we all need to hear. You have a special place in this world. You have a unique identity among God's people. You have a purpose in life. Now, as I reflect on these words that Abraham was told by the Lord, I think that these words, these ancient words that were a message for the identity of the people of God in the ancient times, is still a very helpful message for every one of us. And it's actually a message that I'd love for you young people to take with you as you head out to Catalina. You are a special people. Each one of you is unique, and God has called you to a special place in life. And God is blessing you to be a blessing to others. God has given you a purpose. Now, as you think of this message, I would encourage all of us to pray for these young people, that they might somehow, just like God has spoken in the past, God would continue to speak in your lives, even as you go out together and to have some time of fun. Certainly it's going to be fun, and it's going to be a lot cooler in Catalina than it is here. I'm going to be joining you midweek. I'm looking forward to it, let me tell you. But not just getting out of the heat. I'm looking forward to just sharing in the fellowship together with you. Because, the message that God provides to Abraham here is a message that God has for all of us. Every one of you has a special place in this world. Every one of you has a unique personality and a unique identity as a child of God. And each and every one of you has a purpose in this life. And that's such a positive message, especially in this world where we hear these messages that, you're nobody, or you don't belong, or life is meaningless. In this world that is so negative, you're taking some time and just getting away and going to turn off all the media around you and just hang out with God and with one another. And as you do that, I encourage all of us to open ourselves up to this same message that God has, not just for Abraham and for these young people, but for all of us. Every single one of us has a unique place in this life. We have a special identity that God has given us, and we have been called with a purpose. Let's consider how this message came to Abraham and the impact that it made on his life, and what kind of impact it makes for us. Shall we? Just think about it. First of all, we're told in this text that Abraham was given by God a special place. A special place. Now, if you were to go back in ancient world and talk to Abraham in the time of Genesis chapter 12, then you could ask him, what is your special place? Where is home for you? Now, remember, last week we looked at how Abraham was from Ur. He was Abram from the land of Ur. But Abram would not tell us that his home was in Ur. He would say his home is in Canaan, because that's the new place that God gave him. But if you ask him, have you ever been there? He'd say no. You see, his home was a place that he had never been to yet. But he was going there because God had given him this place to go. And sometimes I think that we as Christians can get the idea that our sense of who we are and our identity is in our place, our church, our people, our stuff. And yet what the message of this text is that not only is your place some place that you're going to Catalina, but your place is going with God. In our text, there's a very, very telling phrase. It says, Abram was told to go to the place where God would show him. It wasn't so much the place that he was going, but it was going with God. The whole idea that's being shared here is the concept of pilgrimage. I mean, we've sung several songs today. Thank you for the great selections of songs today, Bruce. We are called as Christians, as believers of God, to be on a pilgrimage. And this whole idea of a pilgrimage is reflected here in this text. Abraham was that first pilgrim. And certainly today, Jews talk a lot about their land and the importance of the land. But right from the start, more important to being a follower of God was not so much living in the land, but traveling with God. And a pilgrimage is an experience that we talk about in faith communities where we go on a journey with God and we open ourselves to God on the journey. Now, some people will place a lot of emphasis on that pilgrimage that they're going to. Have you ever known anybody that has gone on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem? Have you known anybody that's gone on a pilgrimage to Santiago in the north of Spain? They've got the Camino, what is it called? Camino de Santiago, that's what it's called. Cindy and I were there a couple years ago, all these pilgrims walking along the way. And then we got to Santiago. But what is more important than getting to Santiago is the place that you're in together with God, and you're moving together with the various places with God. Now, there's a message for you young people, there's a message for us as adults, and there's a message for our whole church with this whole concept of a pilgrimage. Let's think about a message for our young people, first of all. You know, I was thinking of this importance of really going with God on pilgrimage when I was with some of my nieces and nephews a couple of weeks ago. I went up to Spokane, Washington for a wedding, and my niece, Stacia, was getting married. And as she was getting married to her groom, Jason, one of my other nieces, Stacia's cousin, a girl named Xinlan, who's been adopted from China, really one of the younger cousins, she came up to me and she says, "Uncle Steve, can you tell me some jokes?" And I said, "Sure, I'll tell you some jokes." And so I went through my jokes that I have just like on the edge of my memory, and I just kind of went through that list. I told her some Smulgarian jokes. If you want to hear them, I'll tell you later. I told her some elephant and Tarzan jokes, and if you want to hear those, I'll tell you those later. But then I just kind of ran out of jokes. So another one of the cousins, Micah, from yet another one of our families, he said, "Oh, I'll find some jokes." So he opened up his iPhone and he started looking up jokes. And he found the joke that was the theme of our whole weekend. You want to hear it? It's a great joke. It goes like this: "Why did the elephant paint his toenails red?" "So he could hide in cherry trees." That's good, right? Have you ever seen an elephant in a cherry tree? Works pretty well, right? Yeah. Now, the reason that this joke became the theme joke for our weekend was because Xinlan just kept on thinking about that joke. She kept on thinking about cherry trees and elephants. And it was intensified because the wedding that we had was outside. It was in the backyard of Jason, the groom's family. And out in that backyard, there were a bunch of cherry trees. Now, we spent a lot of time in that backyard. We had the rehearsal there. We had the rehearsal dinner. We did all the setup and decorations. Then we had the wedding ceremony, and then we had the reception, all there in the backyard. And every time I saw Xinlan, we would kind of look up in those cherry trees. And she was just wondering. She was wondering, what is true and what can I trust? And when I think about Xinlan's kind of questions in her young little mind, I think of how so many of us are actually on a continuum of understanding and trusting what is real and what is true. Every single one of us goes on a journey trying to open ourselves up to what is right and what is proper and what is good. And every one of us on that continuum, I would say, should, from our text, continue on that continuum and don't wait to have all the answers until you make a commitment on a few of those things. I think it's so worthwhile to go through life with Jesus, even if you don't have every answer figured out yet. Now, the message that I hear for us adults, maybe some of us that are the same age as Abraham was here in the text, 75 or older, the message for us is the journey is for us as well. The journey never ends. Sometimes people think, well, I went on a journey when I was young, but what about now? That journey's over. Well, the reality is there's always something new to learn. There's always a new message that God has for us for growing and for trusting in God. And so as we are praying for the young people, one of the things I'd encourage us to think about, praying for the young people, how do we open ourselves up to what God is doing in us? How do we continue our pilgrimage? And I would even extend that question, how does this impact the church itself? Bob came up here just a few moments ago and talked to us about these wonderful windows that we have in our sanctuary. This is our place, and this is a beautiful place. Not only do we have this beautiful place, but we also have fabulous programs that we are a part of, and we have tremendous missions that we are involved with. And as wonderful as this place is, and as wonderful as the programs are, it's not ultimately about this place, but it's about our journey together as we do this stuff together. Now, one of the things I was talking with Bob Hodges about, who is the chairperson of our new committee, which is working on the master plan for our facilities for the next 50 years. As we look at repairs that we have to do and adjustments and egress and ingress and foundation issues and all the rest, how do we become good stewards of this wonderful property that God has given us into the next 100 years of this church? One of the things I told Bob, ultimately it's really not about this property. It's really about Jesus and our relationship to Jesus. It's about the journey that we have with one another. It's all about that journey. So the first thing that we learn in our text today is just the importance of our identity as followers of God and how we have been called to a special place in this life. Second thing that we learn from this text is that we have also been given a special name. A special name. You notice in the text, Abraham is not called Abraham yet. If you go and asked him back in chapter 12, what is your name? He would introduce himself as Abram. Abram's name didn't change until he was on his pilgrimage for a little while. Then God changed his name. Then Abraham had a son, Isaac. And then Isaac had a son, Jacob. And then when God got a hold of Jacob, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And Israel became the name for the whole people of God. Whenever God gets a hold of us, he transforms our identity and he gives us a sense of our purpose in life. Now, I have a mother-in-law who changed her name. Her name is Wilma. And she didn't like her name. In fact, she went to church one time to a Bible study, and the new minister who met her there at the Bible study said, "What is your name?" And she said, "Uh." And he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear your name. What is your name?" She said, "Uh." And he said, "Can I get that again?" And she said, "Wilma, but do I have to have a name tag?" Because he was writing out name tags for everybody. And he said, "Well, if you had any name in the world that you could choose, what would you choose for your name?" She said, "Susan." So he wrote Susan on her name tag, and her name's been Susan ever since. Isn't that a great story? Maybe some of you have been given a different name, but you don't like Wilma. Because for my mother-in-law, that's the name that Fred would always yell to get the attention of Mrs. Flintstone. My name is Steve. And it's also Stephen J. Or you can call me StephenJDavis.com. Or you can call me Pastor Steve, or you can call me the Reverend Dr. Stephen J. Davis. But all those names and all those titles don't mean a thing compared to the name and title that God gives to us. In the scripture, we're told that Peter was given the name Peter when he had been Simon before. We're told in the New Testament that Saul, a persecutor of the church, was transformed into Paul. And Paul tells us that we have all been adopted by God and given a new name as children of God. And when I think about my name before God, that is the name that I treasure more than any other name, that I am a child of God. And it is really my great hope and prayer that every one of us would understand the beauty of that calling as a child of God. When I think of how we are called as children of God, not only is it a name that I am called by the Lord, but I'm given the opportunity to know my Lord in a special way. No longer do I necessarily think of God simply as the philosophers think of God, as the prime mover, as the ground of all being, as the first cause, as the holy other. But I can look at God as Jesus taught me to see God, as my Heavenly Father. And I can pray to God in a personal way, like Abba, Daddy, just like Jesus prayed. And that ability to pray in a personal way to an intimate God is such a gift. It's something that Abraham began to learn even on his first pilgrimage, and it's something that was continually taught throughout the scriptures and ultimately taught in Jesus Christ. Now, not only are we taught that we have a place and we have an identity, but we also have a purpose. And this is so fundamentally important to grasp in this text, because it's very possible for a Christian to say, yes, I am special before the Lord. I have a unique place. But if we don't grasp the third message, we can become our own self-centered, selfish little enclave, pointing a finger at everybody else, saying that we're better than and they're less than. In fact, I have a Christian young person, same age as some of my nieces and nephews, that recently told me that he believes Christians are some of the most bigoted people he's ever met. And he says, and I'm one of them. I'm a Christian. Why is it that Christians will be so bigoted? I couldn't dispute his experience, but I did tell him, as far as I see it, opening yourself up to the Spirit of Christ, to be a child of God, to have the very living presence of God living in your life, to have the identity as a child of God, ought to make us as charitable and loving and gracious as Jesus is. Why is it that it makes some people so bigoted? I don't understand. It ought to make us open and caring and loving and gracious. In our text, we're told that Abraham was told he would be blessed to be a blessing. And that's what we're called to do. We're blessed to be a blessing. And if we don't get that third message, then we missed the really essence of the other two. We have a unique identity. We have a very special place in this world so that we can bless other people. I have a friend, his name's Bill. He is a police chief in New Jersey. And Bill tells me that he just feels like his whole purpose in life is to help other people. And I know so many police officers that are like that. They just feel like their purpose is to help other people. Bill was at a scene of a crime where one of his officers was filling out a report, and there was a lady that comes running up to the chief of police, and she had a limp little baby in her arms. And she says, my baby can't breathe. And so in that moment, Bill, who has all this lifetime of experience and training that's behind him, just grabs the baby, started artificial respiration on that little baby, and brought the baby to life. He saved that baby's life. And I was talking to Bill about this, and I said, wow, I've always wanted to save a life. He goes, well, I've been able to do it 3 times. I go, that's amazing. I had an opportunity to save a life once. I did artificial respiration, but I wasn't able to save this person. And it was so despairing to me. And Bill said, well, you're saving lives in your own way, Steve. In fact, later on that week, I had a couple come stop by my house. And they said, hey, can we come see you and Cindy? And I said, sure. And they said, hey, we just wanted to tell you that we think that you've really helped save our marriage. Thank you for that. And I thought, wow, I do have some gifts to help save people. You have those gifts too. Every single one of us has gifts. We have been blessed to be a blessing. How are we using those gifts to bless? Let's reflect upon this text right now, and as we send these kids off in our prayers, let's explore spiritually before the Lord how we might open ourselves up to the way God is directing us. Let's pray.